have our presenter for today, and I'm very glad and honored to introduce Christine Green, who is the current IFPUG president, and she has also her own company, IFPUG by Green, and she has been working for or representing IFPUG, and she's been in IFPUG since the 90s. I don't know exactly which day, but I know I met her there for many, many years ago. And she is really interested and devoted and within software measurement and software delivery, different kinds. And she's very good at, if you want to discuss AGILE and so on, how to measure that and the use of that and use of metrics within AGILE development. So I will now stop sharing here and put over to Christine. Very welcome, Christine, for this session. Then you have to unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good. And you can see my screen. So the first thing I just want to tell you guys is that this presentation is not going to include anything related to the non-functional sizing measure that IFPUG has, which is called SNAP. But if you want to know more about SNAP or never heard about SNAP, then I highly recommend that we got a webinar within IFPUG already on the 24th of March. So that's a little advertise. Susmita, who is on this, a participant at this presentation, is our committee chair of the Partnership and Event Committee within IFPUG, and she's going to host this event with Salman Ben Khan, who is the chair of the Non-Functional Sizing Standards Committee. So today I'm going to talk about successful software delivery with estimation as a profession. And this presentation is actually a slight alteration of a presentation I did in December, which were given to around 100 C-levels, so CIOs, CTOs, CFO resources through a Danish-based consultancy company that asked me to do this presentation to their clients. So I hope that you will enjoy it. And that you might want to promote when IFPUG is releasing this presentation as a way of introducing software benchmarking, software estimating, software sizing to C-level management and leadership. So Pierre has already introduced me. One of the things that might be important for you guys to know is that I do part-time project management where I am a project manager on complex or critical projects. Sometimes it ends up being full-time, but it's supposed to be only part-time because I also do the software sizing and an estimating technique as a specialist. But I think that it's kind of like good to know that I'm doing both, because that means that a lot of the things that I'm going to address to you guys today is not, you know, things that is theoretical for me. It's actually something that I use in my work as a program and project manager. I'm going to start with a little bit of fact from the Standards report, the latest chaos report from Standards. That kind of like shows that about only 35% of all IT software projects is considered a successful software project. And that, in my mind, is very, very critical. The latest financial report that I have seen tells us that 2.4 trillion US dollars is used every year, or was used in 2020 within the US on IT software projects. So if we only have 35% of the IT software projects being successful, it's quite a lot of money that we are wasting down the drain, not used, because we have 19% of all projects that is basically failing. They never deliver to the value expected. They just get cancelled. They basically, stopped existing, and they either need to, fail the business improvement that they were looking for, or they fail the all the money and the budget that they have used so far, and they need to restart it from scratch. When we look at it, kind of like comparing to the financial data that I have been able to find, is that if we remove the ability to fail a software project, we will immediately bring in a return of investment of about 1% of the revenue of every company. So that's based on the amount of percentage of the revenue that each company is using on IT software projects, and the amount of failed projects. So basically the return of investment of making good estimates, sizing and scoping correctly, and controlling and monitoring the project correctly is quite significant return of investment. So that might be worth, when people are telling you, we might not have money for it, it's not in our pipeline or anything else like that, you might want to kind of like raise some of these numbers to your leadership and to your management. 46% of all software project is challenged. A challenge means that it doesn't bring the value expected. It didn't deliver in time. It didn't deliver within the budget that was expected, so the estimates was wrong. Challenge project can be very expensive. At the end, it can double or triple the budget required. So again, 46% is a significant number, and those are some of the things that I think we need to work on changing by making sure that software project team members is working correctly, and the leadership understand the value of bringing in the right team members and having the right tools and techniques in place. So as I stated, the challenge project not meeting budget, time, or delivery, or delivering the value expected to the business. Standish report changed from delivering within budget, time, and schedule to delivering the value expected to the business in their recent analysis that they did. Well worth reading Standish report. There's a lot of good inputs there, so I can highly recommend those. In my mind, successful projects require the use of a combination of art and science. It's kind of like, it's not a straightforward, it's not like a silver bullet result that can make a software project successful. So I'm going to try to highlight during this presentation what it is that I think is the combination of art and science. I'm going to start out by telling a short story about my background, which is why I do the things that I do. So I'm going to kind of like make some analogies to other organizations or other types of work, and want you to think a little bit about when I'm talking about my background and why these three items is significant in my life. During my master degree in mathematics, I worked on a significant project that is actually used in training anesthesia doctors today. It's evolved during the 30 years that has passed, but it was about simulating the flow and velocity of anesthesia in a human body. And basically, when you want to simulate anesthesia, the flow and velocity, you need to think about anesthesia is acting differently in the body. If anesthesia is basically being held back in fat and muscles, and then released when the anesthesia reaches a certain level. It's being used in the bloodstreams and stuff like that. So creating a mathematical model and simulating the flow and velocity of anesthesia is depending on a lot of different factors, 10 major components and then a huge amount of minor components. And it is possible today to actually test anesthesia drugs using this 10 component mathematical model to actually test the anesthesia before we even start testing it on animals or human beings. If they can do it, we should be able to do it, and in many cases we are doing it, but right now only 2 to 4% of companies around the globe and software projects around the globe is using simulation to actually predict how much time, what type of resources do we need, what is the schedule, what is the expected defect and stuff like that. And that is, in my mind, a sad percentage that we can't get that up to 90 or 95%. The first major project that I worked in after graduation was for a Danish company who were building cement factories. And what they needed was that they needed to be able to estimate and plan a build of a cement factory, and bearing in mind that cement factory is built based on the component of gravel and stuff like that that is nearby the cement factory, because if you have to ship, you know, gravel from Finland to Denmark, it won't be worth it. So the components that goes into a cement factory is much depending on the material nearby. But when they had kind of like estimated and planned the cement factory built, the software was able to transform it into how can it be delivered. Because there was a difference between how you plan an estimate and how you actually deliver a cement factory, because you need to order material from different suppliers, you need to have different type of resources available. So those are two different things. And again, if you make that analogy compared to software estimating, we need to be able to estimate and plan and then re-engineer the estimate and plan so that the team that is actually going to execute the estimates and plan and work against those, both from a scope perspective, from a time perspective, from a cost perspective, that they are able to use that on a daily routine without, you know, a major amount of work on monitoring and controlling these things. The last thing I'm going to use as an analogy was not unfortunately something that I was engaged with myself, but really kind of like inspired me, which is the moving of a lighthouse in Denmark. So it was just about to fall down into the ocean due to erosion of the coastline. And in order to move this lighthouse 70 meters, which is kind of like a short distance in many sense, they needed to secure this lighthouse, which was from 1800. They need to build railroad tracks. They needed to kind of like create a cement foundation on it so that it didn't break. They needed to provide inside the lighthouse stability enough so that they can actually move this lighthouse 70 meters. This project was very much a evidence how agile and a lot of different resources had to work together, even though they might not be speaking the same language, they were not kind of like the same type of background or culture or trait skill set, but they managed to do this together, and it actually took them only 2 weeks to move the light tower the 70 meters. So the execution of the cut-over phase was planned and prepared very carefully. So why are these cases relevant? I think it's relevant because a lot of times when I see how we treat software projects, we don't seem to kind of like think about it as something that needs to be modeled, something that needs to be twisted around, something where we need to make sure that we take all considerations into the planning and execution of the project in order to make a final, you know, perfect delivery. So think about these three cases when I move on with my presentation, and think about the analogy that I made inside your head. So let's talk a bit about why do IT projects fail, and what could support the success of a software project. Now, 20 years ago, Futrell, Schaefer, and Schaefer wrote the Quality Software Project Management book. And one of the things that they have been cited for quite a lot over the last 20 years is that the single most important task of a project is to set realistic expectation. Unrealistic expectation based on inaccurate estimates are the single largest cause of software failure. Now, this was 20 years ago, and a lot of us would say that since then we introduced, extreme programming, agile, lean processes, and all that stuff, which is true. But again, if we look at the standards report over those last 20 years, we actually haven't improved. We actually stagnated. In my mind, we have maybe a bit fewer challenge projects. We have, a few percentage more successful projects, but the amount of failed projects which never deliver is actually the same. So even though we have introduced all these things, we haven't been able to successfully find the recipe for delivering software without meeting challenges or failing. So let's talk a little bit about what a realistic estimate is. One of the things that is influencing is the scope. And again, if we take the scope as an influencing factor on failed or challenged projects, both the Standish report and the PMI Plus report is talking about scope as the influencing factor for the failing. They fail to deliver within the combined objective and requirement needed to complete a project. So that means that a lot of the projects is failing due to the fact that we did not set realistic estimates on what are we actually capable of delivering, and realistic expectations as to what is the scope that we're going to deal with. So the communication between the business, the user, the development team, the project manager, those who estimates has failed from a scope perspective. The other influencing factor is time. We fail to deliver within the planned time and schedule. That goes both to failed and challenged project. So we're not able to estimate and predict the amount of effort, the amount of schedule duration that is required in order to deliver. And I'm going to add a little one because one of the places where I see when I'm being called into critical projects, I'm usually not part of the startup of the project. I'm being called in as a project manager when things are challenged, and a lot of times they have actually reached the estimating or the testing phase, and when the users or the business start testing the software, it didn't meet up to their expectations, and that suddenly caused a huge amount of rework, a huge amount of additional features that needs to be added, which was seen as priority one but never identified before, and a huge amount of effort on kind of like gaining the trust between those receiving the software and those building the software, regardless of whether it's a supplier-client agreement with a contract or whether it's an internal in-house development. The third one is of course budget as the influencing that, when things take longer, when scope becomes unclear, needs to be reworked, or things are being added or removed, then it will impact the estimated budget. Now, a lot of you have seen the triangle of estimating, and in reality, you kind of like, you get the scope, time, budget within the estimating that you need to do. You need to estimate the scope, you need to estimate the time, you need to estimate the budget. And if you're an agile project, then you have the budget and time fixed, and then you need to estimate the scope that can go into each of the iterations. So it's actually the same, just twisting the triangle around. Influencing factor is, of course, quality of the product, quality of the scope description, and stuff like that. But what we also has is that if we look at it from different, the perspective of all stakeholders in a project, the budget, the time, and the scope is what brings value to the end user, to the leadership, to the business, etc. So we have the value in the middle of the triangle. So when we look at then, what does it take to actually produce a software project that is successful? The three things that the standards report has identified is the good sponsor, the good team, and the good place. I'm going to talk a little bit about these three items. So the good sponsor is somebody who understands, the scope and the budget. The good sponsor is usually leadership and management that needs to understand, if we can meet this within my budget, what will it do for my business, and what improvements will my employees, my clients, my product have if we can run with this scope. And then the time is kind of like secondary to them. Unless they have a time to market, then they might agree on a higher scope. But the good sponsor needs to at least understand the budget and the scope, and understand the impact of changing the scope to the budget, or understand, the impact of reducing or increasing the scope to the budget. The good team is those people that are working on it. The software development, 90% of the cost associated with software development is resources, it's people. And sometimes I have a feeling that people forget that a software development project might be digitalizing a business process for the end user, but the development of a software project is done by people. So people need to understand, the time and the impact to the budget, and people from a project management perspective, and the level of resources, the experience will impact the budget. But if you have only junior, it will be maybe lower budget but more time. If you have senior, maybe higher budget but less time is required. The good place is to ensure that everything that is being done is kind of like done in a way where it's lean, it's capable of changing fast, it's having the right tools and techniques and resources in place at the right time. So how can we unlock value through estimating? And one of the things is, of course, to make sure that all these factors is in place, making sure that the sponsor understands the scope at the level that is good for the sponsor, and understand the impact or the risk associated with the scope and the things that the project is doing to the budget and time, to make sure that the right team is in place, and to make sure that the good place is consistent. Now, I actually think that one of the ways of solving some of the issues, not all of the issues, is by introducing function point analysis. Function points analysis, as I think everybody present today know, is a method for measuring and or estimating the functionality of a software project. So let's have an analogy of it. How much does it take to build the Lego construction? So some of you might know that there is this kit Lego called Duplo, which is bigger blocks for the small kits or the unexperienced builder. They can do simple constructions on it. We also have Lego techniques with the complex construction. So if we look at it with our, Lego experience in hand, the time that it takes to build something in Lego depends on the requirements, the type of bricks, plates, tiles, etc. that is required. Also the how, you know, accurate our requirement is, whether, you know, I ask people just to, you know, here's 100 Lego bricks, build a car, or we give them very, very clear direction as to how, with very clear specification that has been reviewed and proven to work, and maybe even, you know, tested, prototyped for whether it is sufficient to actually build it. Then it also kind of like depends on the experience at hand. If you put a 5-year-old to build the Lego Technique car, they might need to understand and learn how to read the diagrams in a Lego building instruction, where somebody who has you know, built Lego for the last, you know, 20, 30, 40 years and continue doing it might have a high expertise on it, and they might be smarter in the way that they build, and they will definitely build in a faster speed. It also depends, of course, of the technology and methodology you use. Lego got special bricks. If you had to build a special brick from scratch, it would take longer. But some of the constructions that Lego has created, you could just, you know, plug and play a special brick into the car and it will work, like the engine. So let me talk a little bit about how function point analysis is used as a relevant methodologies in today's world. Governments around the globe is using it for things like request for proposal evaluation. So if they got, you know, 20 requests for proposal answers, they need to kind of like evaluate them against each other. And that could be by asking for a function point analysis on it. And the function point analysis in this case will then basically break down the component into the requirements into these, you know, organized sets. It will create a boundary diagram that may be specifying the high-level business requirements and the size of those, etc. They will be using it for competitive pricing, monitoring and control, quality assurance, and to evaluate different scenarios. So what if we only do 50% of the scope in the first release, and then 50% in the next release? Or what if we put in 2 additional senior resources? What will happen then? The European Union is one government that is using function point for competitive price evaluation. They're also using it for price per function point. So they set a price per function point, and they actually use that for enhancements going forward. And they use it for monitoring, control, and scenario. Their kind of like statement is that they want to address contraction options, including the adoption of IFPUG sponsored methodology, with a view of reducing reliance on single contractor for evolutions. Evolutions is their word for enhancements. So if we look at it from a kind of like a perspective of phases or gates where they're using within a project, they have an initial value estimation of both size, price, and time already at the kind of like contractual level, and then they work on the requirements and analyze them, and then they do a re-evaluation of the estimates, both size, price, and budget and time. And then they do the design and monitoring, and the price of that will be price per function parts. And then when they reach the transition into production, they would do a value evaluation, and they will then use that for future enhancements going forward. So this is an example of how some of the agencies are using IFPUG function points. Private sector. So usually the private sector, when I'm talking about private sector in this sense, it's kind of like things like mobile phone companies or insurance companies that are purchasing from different types of delivery organizations to deliver software projects. They are again using it as an estimation comparison on request for proposal, monitoring and measuring of software, but they're also using it for supplier evaluation and price negotiation. So again, I'm going to give you an example. They can analyze the project portfolio of the maintenance by analyzing the quality of their system by defects per function points and by price per function points. They can compare based on speed of delivery per function point, and they can create dashboards if they got several suppliers and evaluate the different suppliers against each other and evaluate their ability to be competitive on things like speed of delivery, price, defect, quality, etc. So an example here from later is where they have done an analysis and basically kind of like grouped the different projects based on delivery, and kind of like the idea is to make sure that all their suppliers and all their deliverables ends up in the, you know, the good range where the productivity and price per function point is as good as possible. So when we talk about the usage of function point for project budgeting and estimating, you can kind of like use different types of techniques. Parametrics tools like modeling, scenario analysis, and Monte Carlo. You can use analog tools like comparing your project with a previous project that looks like yours. And you can of course also do a retrospective benchmark to learn from your lessons. And you can do a productivity benchmark both internally and externally, and you can do it against IFPUG data. Is an excellent choice. An example of an organization that introduced parametric estimating tool is NATO, where they started using Gallerad's CS tool for negotiating project costs, but also evaluating, so finding the right scenario for them. By using this as a competitive analysis and parametric estimating tool, they actually created quite a lot of savings. So I think NATO will probably not have the sentence ever that function point analysis is a costly measure together from the way that they use it and the way that they are capable of negotiating. Now bear in mind that the functional scope using function point analysis is only covering the size of the business process from a functional perspective. There's a lot of other factors that needs to be included that are a lot of them are project specific, like the non-functional requirement, risk, travel, stuff like that. But the other one that is a huge influencing factor on the ability to estimate and be productive is the team's performance. Again, I'm not going to talk much about it during this presentation, but I can highly recommend to those of you who hasn't read the book Nucleon. That is a quite, you know, good book, which is making a model for measuring a team's performance, and quite a lot of good analogies to what you need to be aware about when you are thinking about, you know, how to optimize the team from a skill set and the good place perspective. So just a few final words on function points analysis, because in my mind, you know, just using function point for that single number, the size measure, is in my mind a waste of time almost, because there's so many other good things that comes out of it. It is definitely a way of bridging the gap on the communication between the sponsor, the user, the technical perspective and the planning needs. The way that function point analysis works is that it's breaking it down into to the 5 components. It got, you know, visual diagramming techniques that can be used to communicate with the sponsors, and it also breaks it down so that the gap between, you know, the requirements, the design, and the testing expectations is kind of like very consistent. So I highly recommend that if you've never seen, you know, a result of a function point analysis with all its bells and whistles, to try to look at this. So if you're not using function point analysis in your organization, my, you know, 4 words of recommendation is to get the right support to set the goals of objective of what is it that is the biggest issue within your organization or your types of projects, and try to set the strategy on what level of accuracy and consistency you're looking for, how many people do you need, and kind of like what direction do you need to go. Then I recommend, of course, training and certification. And my experience as a certified function point specialist for more than 20 years is that mentoring is required, especially if you train technical personnel to do the function point analysis. They have a difficulty seeing it from a functional, logical perspective, and that will kind of like ruin your strategy of consistency and accuracy. But when that is said, the first time you do a function point analysis, I'm 100% under the conviction that you will get a return of investment immediately. So solving the free-fall knots is to make sure that you have scope control, that you treat estimating as a profession, and that you use the right tools, method, and processes in order to get successful delivery of projects. And that means that you need to have professionalism within scope management, estimating, and forecasts. You need to have size and prioritize your requirements and the value that your requirements is bringing. And you need to control your project and process by quantifying and validate what you're doing. So, as I said, successful IT budget is a combination of science and art. Function point analysis, I believe, is one of the most influencing factors in turning and improving the success rate of software projects around the globe. So I do believe that everybody should add an estimating and scope specialist to the team. So thank you. If you have any questions, feel free to put it into the comments section. And if you want to get on hold of me, feel free to connect to me on LinkedIn, or you can send me an email, or you can WhatsApp me on my phone. That's it for today.
Thanks a lot, Christine. It was really interesting, and I hope everyone feels the same about this. And we already got one comment here from Thomas, how they used function point analysis for estimating, and they're really good, a fantastic good result of that. But that was a while ago, and we can hope now that with the new regulations or from European Union, when they are promoting the use of function point analysis, that we should get better quality and a better knowledge of what we're delivering. So please, if you have a question, if you don't want to put them in the chat, you can unmute, and we got one here directly. How can we use function point analysis in agile projects?
Ooh.
So if you use agile processes, Scrum or whatever you use, it really doesn't matter. In my mind, the function point analysis comes in already when you start preparing your backlog. So my recommendation is that you use function point analysis by having product owners that can estimate or approximate function points. By only using story points and planning poker estimating techniques, you kind of like you miss out on the normalization factor, not only be inside your own project, but also kind of like compared to different projects. One of my recommendation on agile projects is usually to figure out, you know, what is the average size of a user story within your organization, or what is the average size of a user story within your team. But by using function points, you will also be able to, you know, have less replanning due to the fact that you are not capable of delivering all the activities within a sprint that you plan for.
Yeah, we got one comment from Thomas here in Switzerland. You can, yeah, you have your microphone on. You can tell us.
Just very short. The point is, if you do function points in Agile and you compare it sprint by sprint with the story points, you will get two totals of function points. One is the product, which is less than what actually has been worked for in the sprints in total. And the difference in between is what you actually gain using Agile to get the requirements right. It's a wonderful experience, and whoever tried it never will miss it again.
I can highly recommend looking at a presentation done by a Gallerat resource called Ian Brown. He did a presentation, I think it's about 8 years ago or something like that. He called it Agilators, and he introduced function points to an agile team that hated function points by calling the size measure Agilators. And everybody started loving it. And when they had used it for a period of time, he revealed that they had actually been using function points. So they just didn't know enough about function points to actually know that Agilators was a function point performed.
May I can ask a question?
Go ahead, Alessandro.
I have been working with projects for more than 30 years, and I used a lot of function point in the past. Today we have a big challenge for agile projects. We have a product backlog today, and we do not have a way to count and estimate everything before we start a sprint. And many times at the end of at the sprint, the outcomes is not a feasible delivery to the client. Maybe you have part of the deliverable of a final implementation, or you have part of the job you need to do in a sprint. And we have a lot of challenges today to use function point in Agile because of this. We are working by squads capacity, and because of this, I do not see a way how I can use function points in this case when the client want to pay by the sprint capacity instead of the final deliverable you have. For example, when you have 3-4 sprints, at the end we will deliver part of the product, and you can count the deliverable you provide to the client in terms of function points. In this case, where you cannot have the initial estimate, but the estimate we will be doing along the project, and maybe everything can change in agile projects because it depends on the client needs and the market trends during the project. What do you think, and what are suggestions to using function points in this case?
So first of all, you know, if I take my PMP hat on and my, you know, software development hat on, it really doesn't matter whether you are agile or hybrid or waterfall. Any requirements will usually go through a waterfall phase breakdown. So what you can do is that if you don't have a set definition of done, because that's what it sounds like, you don't have a set definition of done in your agile project, so that you only add to the sprint what you actually expect to reach that definition of done. So what you can do, and what I have done, is that I have broken down basically the deliverables based on a percentage. So if I'm doing sprint 1, for instance, touch on 70% of the backlog and reach the gate of I have now analyzed this requirement, then, you know, 10% of the price will then be paid off for that function points. And then when I doing sprint 3, for instance, take 70 function points and I reach the stage of I'm done with the build, it's ready to be tested, then it might be 70% of the price that needs to be paid minus those items that has already been paid in previous sprint. So what you can do is that you can have a kind of like whatever definition of done that you have, you can have, you know, several definition of done, put a percentage on that definition of done, and then use that in a matrix format in order to calculate the price and your progress and your velocity.
Yes, but in the sorry, go ahead.
No, but I'm done.
Because one problem we have here today, for a public sector, many times they set the requirements they want you need to deliver, the functionalities, and you have the estimates amount of function points. It's very common in the public sector, but in many times in the private sector, what's happening? They do not have the detailed functional requirements. They have only an idea of the product they want to deliver into a backlog, and we will not detail the functionality until we start the sprint. So it's very complicated to define a value for the project at the beginning of the project. You don't know what will be the size of the project. This is the most common execution of an agile project. You have a backlog, you do not have functional details, and we split this backlog during the sprint and extract the details and the functionality you need to deliver the project. So we cannot have a way to sizing the product or the project we need to deliver at the beginning of the execution. So,
but that's why I disagree with you. If you have a case like this, what you do is that you size by approximation. And that means that you need to make assumptions related to the size. So if you are being told that they need, you know, a business application, and you have a, you know, a 2-pager with the high-level business processes that they want to touch on, then you need to kind of like say that I assume that this business process is this amount of function points, that I can most likely break it down to this amount of reports, this amount of EICOs, this amount of data elements. And then that is your assumption. And that has a certain inaccuracy, but it also have kind of like a constraint on it that if the price and the estimates is based on approximation, then you need to monitor as you go along. You know, the more detail you have, the more accurate your estimate can be. And it might be that you can't have a full detailed estimate of the size of the scope until you reach the testing phase. That might be the case, but then the approximation just gets, you know, better and better, more proved, more detailed, but the final price will be, you know, at the testing phase. And then everything in the testing that is not a defect to your specification described is considered a feature request or change request. And that, you know, will have its own cycle, it will have its own price. So I think that the issue that you are raising there is exactly one of the reasons in my mind why you should be using something to measure the size of your requirement in a way where what you don't know, you can evaluate along the way without losing out on any of the accuracy of it. So the public sector has a tendency sometimes to use a huge amount of time on building requirements and then still not being satisfied when we end up in the testing because they don't like the agile approach because they don't know the process and they don't understand always the impact on their budgets. The private sector usually have a tendency of having very high level requirements and then expect kind of like at the same time to understand why the price is changing. And that kind of like is a way of using function point analysis as a normalization factor. You can promise, you know, that when you deliver into a private or a public, something about your expectation of productivity and velocity that you will be able to deliver. So if you, you know, say, don't know the requirements, but I will be able to deliver 300 function point per sprint. And a function point, if you are using, you know, the whole sprint on analyzing and designing, then again, if you have that, you know, different definition of done with a percentage on it, you will be able to create that measure.
Thomas,
Yes.
Thomas, did you also have a comment?
Yes, just as in my experience, I said that before that actually you do two counts. One is the product, the other one is what you do per sprint. And in fact, if you do that over several sprints, you will see there are sprints where the team mainly focuses on non-functional requirements. And then you have very, very few function points in that sprint. Other sprints, typically the early sprints, they have a high number of functionality done according to the definition of done. But it would not be good, say, to say function point is the only thing that we use, say, for paying the team per sprint. That would not be a good idea. So, it's much better to have the product count as a base and at the end pay for the product, not for all the errands that you do to find out what the real requirements are. And then the testing, ensure all that which is non-functional in its nature.
Yeah, that's my experience, as well as the percentage of non-functional requirements are growing year by year. And you saw from the beginning when Christine showed the first slide, she invited you to attend the upcoming webinar that IFPUG will have, and it's about non-functional requirements. So please look at the IFPUG website and register for that one, and you can learn more about how to measure non-functional requirements and use that when you do estimation as well. And we also hope that we will get the non-functional requirements measured and get that into our database within IFPUG. And when we have that, then you can use that also as history to do this kind of estimation, because you need history data. And if you not have history data yourself in your company, then you know where you should go. You should go to ispsg.org, and then you can get the data from there.
Yes, I understand everything you said. The big challenge is that I work from an IT company. I'm working on Unisys today, and I'm working with projects for more than 25 years, and I'm now at the pre-sales team. And many times the client wants a fixed price. For agile projects, this is very complicated, because how you can make a fixed price for something that you don't know what will be at the end, the final product you need to deliver, and the total effort. So, or you go to the client and make a first advisory to understand the project, and make an estimate around what will be the project size, and you need to invest money on this, or and based on this you can set the assumptions and provide to the client a baseline of the functionalities, and like Christian said, you can go through the change orders to accommodate the project change during its execution. But it's very complicated to have a fixed price if you do not have a way to, at the beginning, estimate the functionalities and non-functionalities requirements you need. You can use function points or other techniques to estimate the non-functional requirements, to define to the client the big picture of the project you need to do. And if you, during the execution, go to another path, you need to understand the difference, recalculating everything, and redo the schedule, the effort, and the price you provide to the client at the beginning. So the problem is this: many times the client wants a fixed price, and you do not have the details to do this and to make a final proposal to the client. So it's many times this is complicated.
But still, can I make a comment that if you don't have any idea at all about what you should deliver, of course it will be very hard to come up with a fixed price. But you can always use function points and the snap points to say, you can estimate and say, we can deliver this much of functionality for this fixed price. And then you can start checking and counting what you're delivering during the project. And then you can say, now we have delivered 20% of what we thought that this the size of this delivery should be, etc. So that's one thing of using function point analysis.
Yes.
May I just...
the client accept that you have a size of a project many times. They need to accept that to have an estimate size of a project. For example, I have a project. This project will be 1,000 function points. Okay. Using function points and Snap, you have this total amount of sizing for this project. But during the execution, maybe depending, because I do not have the details, because I only have a list of backlog of the final delivery we want to have on our hands, but I do not have the detail of the functionality you want. Maybe this can be 1,000, can be 800 or 1,200. So the client wants to have a fixed price, and to change this is many times not so easy during the project execution. I understand that. I understand you have a way to do this.
It's a whole presentation by itself, and I also think that the type of contract that you have requires that you get a forecast specialist to support and advise you on how to get it right.
Yes, one way you are looking to do this is, hey client, I have here, I will provide to you 2 squads to execute your sprints. Those squads has this capacity, and we will provide the achievement of the sprint based on the outcomes. I agreed with you. Maybe this outcome can be a software, a functional software deliverable, or maybe cannot be a software, can be a specification, or can be part of the jobs we need to do to deliver everything. And based on this, we can achieve for 2 weeks sprints those outcomes, and using the sprints techniques, you can show the velocity we are working on, and if you are achieving the outcomes and the goals we agreed at the beginning of the sprint. So we are many times we are looking to the client and sell capacity instead of a fixed price, because we can reduce the risk from the side from who are responsible to deliver the project. So I think the market will grow and evolve to the agile model, and I think we will need to find ways to avoid estimate everything at the beginning, and during the project execution, maybe you can do the estimate. We can count the final product we deliver to the client, or during, for example, you have the MVP for the product. So when you deliver the MVP, you can count, and you can tell to our client, oh, this product we deliver to you, it's a 800 function points project. Based on what you paid and the productivity you have, you have the productivity around X hours per function point. You have a gain in this project. I don't know. I think we need to find a way to
but that is the way, and we are using the way. So I think that the case is that the fact is that agile in itself does not bring successful projects. It's not, a guarantee for success. Just a minute, I need to just rescue my dog.
Okay. May I just point you to the EU LISA purchasing guideline, Alexander, because I think it tells you a lot on your problem that you actually have. And Christina, I'm sure you have the link to the guideline, purchasing guideline from the EU on the EU LISA.
Yeah, but the EU LISA is a bit difficult, because the EU LISA's way of using it, it's not like they are releasing it officially. It's in proposals, which is official. But what I wrote in the chat is that I gave a presentation about the European Union or EU LISA as an agency's way of working on using function points in their contract in July last year. And that will be released as a recorded version within the next couple of weeks.
Right.
The other thing that I'm working on right now that I hope to get ready within the next couple of months is that we also got another agency that has been using function point analysis for scenario analysis, so finding out what is the right approach for their business components from a technical perspective. So analyzing, COTS packages against build your own and stuff like that. And we also had a third where they were using actually the combination of the function point analysis and the SNAP, the non-functional size measure. And that kind of like hit on what you talked about, Thomas, earlier. You can have sprint where no functionality is actually being worked on, but where you do a lot of non-functional or data quality or performance related items that is not sizable, and those you need to make sure that you understand, whether you're working on growing beans or or growing, you know, oranges in trees, or whatever it is that you are doing, because the weight and the size and the effort is different. So if you want to grow an orange tree, you might have to wait several years before it actually deliver you any value. Where if you want to grow beans, you might get a huge amount of value with very little effort. So it kind of like, it depends on what you're doing, and we need to understand that one of the good things, and again, I'm going to promote the fact that we need function point analysts as a profession that is recognized not only as a bean counter, but actually the value that they bring by evaluating the requirements, identifying, you know, where requirements are not suitable for any type of design or analysis because it's too high level, or where requirements is related to something that is non-functional or quality related or project related, but might impact the productivity of the team that is working on the software product development. So, but this is a really, really interesting discussion. But should we see if there's any other questions to the presentation?
No, I haven't seen any in the chat. Anyone, please unmute yourself if you have any question. Meanwhile, this is a very good idea for an upcoming webinar. We'll see if I can find someone that could talk more about Agile and the use of function point analysis.
If you haven't had back yet,
yes.
I have him in my mind. So, but as you see, we have the schedule. We have Julian Gomez coming from Leva MC, that will have a webinar and presentation in April. And then we have Pekka Forselius from FISMA, Finland, who will talk about benchmarking and how you can use that as a tool. And he will do that in May.
Yes. Maybe you can find a way to combine many things for this type of projects. This kind of product, like you use function points, snap points, in combining this with the history points appearing here in Brazil. I'm from Brazil, and there's a company here that they developed a methodology like it's complexity points. At the end, this methodology will give you the number of history points you have, an estimated history points for a project, and the history points depend on the team velocity. You have a multiplier that you can give the total amount of hours, but it's depend on the team. I think it's like function point. Is productivity in function points. You need to define what's the experience of the team in the business. If you have more seniors, more mid, or more juniors, and the knowledge you have in the market, the experience on the technology, the complex of the solution. So the productivity is depending on the many type of variables you need to have on hands to define what's the feasible productivity for a project. I think in the future you need to have a combination of the experience we have with function points. Function points, it's a methodology with more than 3 decades. So you have a lot of experience with this. Maybe you need to combine those new things with function points and map points to find a way to integrate everything in a new vision, or see a way to include this as a way to make this counting and sizing of agile projects. The agile guys, the pure agile guys, said to me when I need to make an estimate for a proposal, function points, we cannot have a way to count a backlog and estimate a project at the beginning of it because you do not have the detailed functionality to count the size of the project. So you cannot have a way to provide a fixed price or an estimated fixed price and put some additional effort over it to cover the project risks. So my thought is that we need to find a way to have those methodologies working together to find a better methodology to cover for waterfall, for rational iterative projects. It works well. For agile project, we are facing some challenges to using function points here. And because of this, we do not have so much detail at the beginning, or you can sell to the client capacity, or you need to have more detail to sell a fixed price project. It's a challenge. I think it's a very big challenge I have today when I talk about agile projects with the agile team. So I think it's a very good discussion we can put on the table and see how we can find new paths to pursue this new methodology. I think it's interesting. We think about it. I think we can have a way to discuss more this.
Yeah, please send in some contribution if you want to have that. You can send it to me or to info@ispc.org, and I will check up and see if we can get someone later on that will talk more about Agile and function point and how you can use it more in a good way that will help everyone. Yeah. And now I think we have to wrap up and stop this presentation and webinar. We have passed a little bit
okay
time, but I'm really excited and really glad that we have had so good comments and discussion today, and I really hope that you will come back within 1 month and listen to Julian that will talk something other thing of using function points and the way they see it from Leda in Spain. So until then, I will say from Sweden, where we have a very wonderful weather today, but it's cold, it's both -degrees in the morning, and say thank you all.
Thank you,
It was a pleasure
guys.
having you here. So bye-bye and see you
Bye-bye.
soon. Bye-bye.